Austin Andrews here with your beacon. Today we take a look at the battle for identity. Kamala Harris, communist or populist? Coming into the Democratic National Convention, Kamala Harris has refused a single interview. She's avoided all but one or two questions from reporters, and she's given speeches with wide rhetoric and very little substance. This was exactly what she needed to do coming into the convention. With 84% positive media coverage, as opposed to the 89% negative coverage her opponent Trump received since she was thrust into the race, Kamala had ridden the wave of positivity into the slight lead with the polls. But the slightness of that lead is unlikely to cut it for the election. This means that the race has been on, the race to define Trump's opponent. Who is Kamala Harris? What does she stand for? And can she be the savior to our country or to the left? At some point, the idea that the sitting vice president of the country is somehow an unknown seems absurd. For one thing, as vice president of the country and the presiding president of the Senate, she had to break more Senate tie votes than any other vice president in the history of our country. On 33 occasions, Kamala Harris had to break the stalemate in the Senate to pass progressive legislation and move forward progressive candidates for federal positions. On a couple of occasions, Kamala was the deciding vote to pass legislation such as the Inflation Reduction Act, a big spending bill chock full of spending for green energy initiatives. The Department of Energy commented on the Inflation Reduction Act after its passing that the bill, quote, makes the single largest investment in climate and energy in American history, end quote. $500 billion in that bill were focused on tax breaks and new spending on clean energy. These tax dollars spent on the green climate change agenda acted as a boon to inflation, not a reduction. While Harris was significantly responsible for pushing the climate bill called the Inflation Reduction Act, she also stepped into the public role of the border czar. She stepped into that role within the first year of the Biden-Harris administration and then oversaw the worst border crisis in United States history. An estimated 10 million or more have entered the country illegally in that 3.5-year span. Kamala has also taken pride being part of the most disastrous and major decisions, such as the exit of the United States from Afghanistan. While Kamala was integral and in lockstep with Biden as his vice president, she had also run against him in the 2020 election primaries, and in those primaries, Kamala revealed herself to be one of the most radical to ever run for president. In fact, as the senator from California, Kamala Harris was labeled as the most liberal member of the Senate by GovTrack. Now, 4 years later, after Kamala Harris was pushed into the position of the presidential nominee for the Democratic Party, GovTrack happened to remove that article, citing that Kamala Harris really didn't technically stay in the Senate long enough for that kind of label. GovTrack wasn't wrong, though. Kamala Harris positioned herself in the 2020 Democratic primary as the most progressive, verging on socialist candidate. She did this through policies such as banning fracking.
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. So, yeah, and starting with what we can do on day one around public lands, right?
Unapologetically, Kamala embraced a policy that still haunts her in Pennsylvania. With the country's gasoline prices up by more than 50% during the Biden-Harris administration, a policy that would further attack the energy sector, continuing to starve it of any hope, would be a disastrous proposition. In the current race, her campaign has stated that she won't follow through on that policy any longer, but she hasn't said it herself, so it remains hanging over her head. Kamala Harris also spoke to the need to restructure and possibly start from scratch when it comes to ICE.
Listen, I think there's no question that we've got to critically re-examine ICE and its role and the way that it is being administered and the work it is doing. And we need to probably think about starting from scratch because there's a lot that is wrong with the way that it's conducting itself, and we need to deal with that.
Not because she wants to be tough on crime or illegal immigration, but because law enforcement and criminalizing entry into the United States is immoral and it needs to be reshaped. Kamala also said in 2020 that the federal crime of illegally entering the United States should itself be ended. She said that she would make it legal for anyone to enter at any time. Doesn't that seem like the system that we actually have now under border czar Kamala Harris? Now she's trying to say that she would be tough on the border, but she hasn't been as vice president. She hasn't even been outspoken about wanting to be under the Biden regime. One of the final issues we want to bring up talking about Kamala is that when asked about medical needs in the United States, her answer just a few years ago was not about strengthening Obamacare or strengthening the marketplace or strengthening private insurance options. Kamala Harris said her plan plainly.
I believe the solution, and I'm actually feel very strongly about this, is that we need to have Medicare for all.
In almost every instance, Kamala Harris's gut reaction to decisions and crises is for the federal government to solve the issue, take the action, make the decision, and rule with authority. This reveals a fundamental lack of trust or belief in free markets, community, or a lack of belief in you and I. The answer to climate change for Kamala Harris was $500 billion in new climate change spending. The answer to difficult financial moments due to medical care is Medicare for All, a massive spend program from the government. And of course, no one ever talks about who has to pay for all of these spending initiatives. As Kamala gave her Democratic National Convention acceptance speech last night, this was a short reaction in the middle of the speech by Tucker Carlson.
This woman's really scary. She could easily get elected president. She's much more skillful than I have ever seen. She's a liar on the deepest level. The things she is saying right now are not just untrue. They're the opposite of the truth, which is the hallmark of evil. She's an extremist. She'll say anything. She's much more like Gavin Newsom than I ever realized. I could go through a whole litany of why what she's saying is not true. It wasn't an armed mob. There's not one person inside the Capitol with a firearm, period. The only person who was shot in the Capitol was an unarmed woman shot by one of Nancy Pelosi's bodyguards. So again and again, she's telling us that she fought the cartels to secure the border. She's the border czar, and the border is controlled by the cartels. She's saying that Donald Trump will free from prison violent extremists, meaning like 75-year-old lower middle class women with diabetes, when she endorsed defunding the police and opening the prisons to allow actual criminals out, which is why the crime rate has spiked, to allow the population of Venezuela's prisons, Caracas's prisons are now living in the United States because of her. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, and I don't want to sound like I'm whining or fact-checking, which I hate, but what she's saying is the mirror image of the truth. She doesn't care. She's got no reference points in the truth, and she's an extremist.
May we all see the truth, hear the lies, and recognize that this election is as important as any election in the United States. I'm Austin Andrews, and I'll see you on the next report.